Professor Tim Noakes is a South African scientist and emeritus professor in the Division of Exercise Science and Sports Medicine at the University of Cape Town. He is also a member of the National Research Foundation of South Africa, who lists him as one of their highest rated members. He has run more than 70 marathons and ultramarathons and is the author of several books on exercise and diet. He is known for his support of low-carbohydrate, high-fat diet as set out in his book, The Real Meal Revolution. Professor Noakes, welcome to Modern Healthspan, and thank you so much for spending the time with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on your show, Richard. I much appreciate it.
All right, thank you. So Professor Noakes, you're one of the top scientists who's studying nutrition and exercise. In fact, you are an endurance person, an endurance athlete. You did a lot of endurance. But you now advocate low carb, high fat. Can you talk us through what led you to that realization?
So I started my career in medicine and realized very quickly that I was more interested in science and understanding how things worked. So I really went into exercise science and physiology and spent my career. And early on in the 1970s, the idea was that carbohydrates were critical for exercise performance. That view is still held. And I was kind of right in the vanguard there with people who were doing this type of research. And we were totally convinced in our data and our findings that carbohydrates were essential. The problem was we never studied the alternative. We never studied athletes who weren't eating carbohydrates, who were eating high-fat diets. So we just repeatedly found the same stuff, that carbohydrates work. And of course they do if you're carbohydrate adapted, they're essential. Eventually what happened was I became progressively fatter and I developed type 2 diabetes. And by chance, I read a book called The New Atkins for the New You by Eric Westman, Finney and Volek. And within 2 hours of reading that, I thought, oh my gosh, I got it all wrong. So from having promoted the high carbohydrate diet for 33 years, in 33 minutes, I realized that I'd been quite wrong. And so I converted to the diet and very quickly lost a lot of weight. My running came back again brilliantly. And I felt so much better because obviously my diabetes was improving. But when I started telling colleagues that this is what happened and making it public, I attracted a great deal of ire and antagonism. And the end result was that we wrote a book called The Real Meal Revolution, which in fact, I just wrote a few pages about the science of low carb eating. And I then became targeted because that changed the teaching of nutrition in this country and it threatened the Dietetics Association. So I was targeted and reported. And the driver was an organization called the International Life Sciences Institute, which is a front for sugar and Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola and so on. And eventually I went to court because they tried to destroy my entire career, which I'd spent 40 years building up this expertise, and they decided they should destroy it. And my university participated in that. I think they were pressurized by industry. So I had to spend 4 years saving my career. So I had to go to court. I won the case 13-0, 13 decisions for me, nothing for them. It went to an appeal and I won the appeal again. And we wrote a book called Real Food on Trial, which describes exactly what I went through in that 4-year period. In fact, it was more like 6 years because I was targeted ruthlessly, not just in the press and with my colleagues, but also on social media. So I got through that. And for people who are interested, they could read the Real Food on Trial, which explains exactly what happened. So what I learned was that if you contest the narrative, and the narrative is that the diet we're eating is healthy, and you just keep eating this diet, despite the fact that obesity and diabetes rates are shooting up. You're not allowed to question that. You just have to do what you're told. And so I've learned that, and we try to challenge it. We formed a foundation, and our goal is to educate doctors and the public that a low carbohydrate diet of real foods is much better for you than the processed foods that people are currently eating.
Right. So there's a couple of things. So you said you read the book about the Atkins diet. So what year was that?
Oh, so that was 2010. It was
about
December the 12th, 2010. It was such a epochal moment in my life that I remember it from the moment. And, I was so fortunate. These things happen in life, that an advert appeared in my emails saying lose 6 pounds in 6 weeks without hunger. And I said, but that's impossible. This is fraudulent. And then I saw the guys' names. I said, these people are fraudulent. And so I went to buy the book to prove to myself that they were frauds, because I knew they're good scientists. But when I read it, I said, my gosh, this is science. And as a nutritionist and exercise scientist, I'd never read any of the studies they were citing on the value of the low carbohydrate diets. It was absolutely astonishing. And the first author, Eric Westman, is the first person in modern days to have publicly shown that you can reverse type 2 diabetes with a low carbohydrate diet. He did that in 2005. No one heard about it. 2005 it just got hidden. And Jeff Volek, the other co-author, has promoted the evidence for a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet reversing metabolic syndrome and showing exactly how it does it. And he's been doing that for 20 years without any funding from official bodies. He's also relegated to the MAD group, but he's one of the best scientists that I know.
Wow. Yes. So that do you see the things changing now? I mean, kind of keto is more accepted. Is our attitudes changing? Is it becoming more acceptable?
Oh, no question, it is. How do I know that? Because there are many more papers coming out supporting the idea. So fortunately, when I went to court, my court battles, I won because of people like Steve Finney and Eric Westman, and I could quote them because there's such a huge body of evidence. What people now say is that the keto diet is no better than the standard diet. Before they said it's dangerous, you can't use it.
Mm-hmm.
Now the official jargon is, well, you can do anything you like, any diet will work, but the keto works, but it's not better than anything else. Before they said the exact opposite. They said they would kill you. And I mean, that's why I was charged for telling people to eat a diet that could kill them. That was the basis of the charge. And so we've moved beyond that. But the reality is all the science proves that the keto diet is better than any other diet for people like myself. And I think this is the key. Gary Taubes has just written a book called The Case for Keto, and it's an utterly brilliant book. But he makes a point that was first made by a British physician, Dr. Richard McCarness, in 1956. And in fact, I could get the book and show it to you. But McCarness said in 1958, actually, he said there are two types of human beings: those who fatten easily and those who can eat what they like and they never fatten. And that's the key. And what Gary Taubes shows, if you are a person who doesn't fatten easily, and you eat all those diets, and you eat sugar, and you eat carbs, and you eat potatoes and chips, and you drink your Coca-Colas, but you never get fat, your immediate interpretation is anyone who gets fat is just lazy and gluttonous. And that's the reason why they're fat. And the reason I'm not fat is because I'm a good person. I'm not gluttonous, you see. And so any doctor who's seeing a fat patient who's thin, if the doctor's thin, that's what they interpret. However, if you're like me and you fatten easily, and then you discover the cure, which is a high-fat diet, you suddenly see through this and you realize that there's genetic factors that make it impossible for us to eat carbohydrates. Utterly impossible. They just make us fat and sick. Now, unless you've had that experience, you don't know. You'll never know, because you've never had to search for a diet that works. And I think that's a critical point to realize, that if you're a fat and easily person, you will never understand that carbohydrates make you fat, because they don't for you. And that's the fundamental problem. So my point is, as more and more people like myself, doctors who get fat and then reverse their diet and get thin, as more and more of us do that, the message gets out. And it doesn't matter what the authorities say, that a high-fat diet is dangerous. We know it's not. And that there are more of us every day. There are more today than there were yesterday. So the message spreads virally. And the same with patients. When patients cure themselves of diabetes, they do not need to take insulin anymore because they're eating a high-fat diet that they're supposedly going to kill them, then they realize it's a lot of nonsense what they're being told.
Right. So a quick question on that. People who get fat easily, people who don't. Do you have any idea what the percentage is between the two groups?
Well, in America, they say 80% of Americans have the metabolic syndrome now.
Yes.
And certainly looking around, I think it's about 10% or 20% of the people can eat whatever they like and they will never get fat. May I just make the point that the old idea, you see, was calories in, calories out. And it doesn't matter what calories you eat. Mm-hmm. It's just overeating calories. And that, of course, that's true. But the point is that when we eat carbohydrates, it's carbohydrates that make us overeat. And as soon as we take the carbohydrates out, we can now balance our energy and we lose weight. And so the calories in, calories out is true. But the point is, if you're fat and easily, you can't cut calories in the same food. You can't eat less of the same food and expect yourself to get thin. You just get hungry. And people don't understand it. If you have to change the makeup of your diet if you're a fat and easily person.
Right. Yes. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So just returning to the trial for a second. So in the end, the kind of the outcome was dependent on the fact that your science was correct, or there was some, was what made the decision?
Yeah, it's very interesting because what I didn't understand, and I've taught dietitians for a long time, the dietetics profession in this country is not asked to question. You may not question. If you question, you're out. There is a dogma, a narrative that is repeated. Now, I saw that in the trial. And fortunately, when I went to trial, my senior advocate said, listen, Tim, we're going to nail them with science. He said, I just want you to present all the science you know. As long as it takes, you just present it. And it took us 12 days. 12 days, 6,000 pages. Now, the prosecution produced one scientific paper as their evidence, one scientific paper, which we showed was probably fraudulent. And anyway, it had nothing to do with low-carbohydrate diets. It was with a high-carbohydrate diet, which they'd misclassified as a low-carbohydrate diet. So we went prepared to give all the evidence. And repeatedly, the prosecution's chief lawyer would say, are we going to get another lecture today, Madam Chair? You see? So she said, yes, you accused him of being not evidence-based. Now you've got to listen to the evidence. The prosecution really messed up because they didn't know what the charge was, whether it was an ethical issue that I'd breached medical ethics or whether I was promoting a bad diet. And they confused the two. And they didn't focus on either properly, and they didn't get the right witnesses at all. No one, a decent witness, would come forward for their case because they knew they'd get nailed. And in the end, a senior National Institute of Health scientist who's from South Africa and who I've debated before, he was in Cape Town and they wanted him to present for the prosecution. When he saw my lawyers, he got cold feet and he cleared out very quickly because we would have exposed him for all his own bad doings over the years and bad science. So to come back to your question, we won it because we presented the science, and that was what we had to do. And they had no science. And by the way, the chief prosecution witness was the person who wrote up the dietary guidelines for South Africa. She wrote the guidelines. And my lawyer destroyed her in the first 5 minutes because he asked her what her qualifications were. And she had none for doing what she was doing. And that was the first time she'd ever been challenged in her career. I know that.
Right. Wow. That is interesting. And it's especially interesting that they then came back for like a replay. I mean, they wanted to appeal, right, after you won. So,
well, you know what they did? They changed the charge. They tried to change the charge. They said my advice was killing millions of patients. That became the case against me because I tweeted something and that was never in the original charge. So now that they tried to change it and they got nailed for that. The judge just said, this is ridiculous. You can't go outside the first. If this is the charge, you can't produce another charge in the middle of the trial.
Right. Yeah. I hope that you found the video informative. Please do hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell button and choose all for any new video release notifications. It encourages us to continue to create more videos about anti-aging and extending healthy lifespan. Thank you so much for your kind support. I wish you all well and will speak to you again soon.